are most of you off. And I was just about to say we are recording this meeting. So if you don't want that, you will have to switch off your camera, which we of course don't encourage because we want to discuss with you. Today we have this data interoperability session of the Ocean Best Practices workshop with the topic Interoperability Data Systems for Digital Twins of the Ocean. I'm very excited. We have great speakers, which you see on the screen. Marjolaine is still hiding, and we have Pierluigi, who will help us with some discussions afterwards. There she is. Hello, everybody. And just to give you some context, I would also share just a few slides to give you a context what digital twins are, what Ditto is, what Turtle is, so that we are all on the same page. And then we can start with the speakers. So I hope you see my screen now. Is that right? Yes, I can't see you, so please say something.
Yes, it works.
Thank you very much. So this is this session is in the context of the Ditto program, the UN Ditto program, and the so-called project under Ditto, which is called Turtle, Interoperability Architectures for Digital Twin of the Ocean. My name is Ute Brunner, and I work in Center of Ocean, Trondheim, Norway. And I'm having this session together with Martin Fisbeck from GeoMar, who's unfortunately on travel, but Joanna from GeoMar is here helping me with the session. Thank you very much. So let me see if I can also put forward. So what is Ditto, Digital Twin of the Oceans? As I said, it's an endorsed UN decade program. It started last year and it will last for the whole decade. And has the objective to facilitate the digitalization of the ocean, so an accessible ocean for everyone. That is one of the challenges in the UN decade. So what do we mean by digital twins of the ocean? That is still something that has to be defined. I think there are very many digital twin definitions out there. And digital twins usually come from the asset-driven industry. So there you have a thing or something and you create digital representation for that. So with the ocean, it's a bit more difficult because it's not only physics, it's also chemistry and biology. What we mean by digital twin is a digital representation. And what is very important is a two-way connection so that the ocean will affect the twin and the twin will affect the ocean or what is in the ocean. So the main thing that Ditto wants to do with digital twins is to use the digital twins for what-if scenarios. So what happens if we have human activity here? What happens if we build something here? And it is also supposed to be accessible for everyone. So this is why it's so important that we talk about interoperability of these twins. So what is the difference between the digital ocean and the digital twin of the ocean? So because we have had the digital ocean for quite a while, we have a lot of networks, observation networks, we have models, ocean models for predictions, in newer times also, in recent times also AI models for predictions, what may happen. And then we take this information from these models and data and we provide a useful tool for and supporting services. But the main questions that we were asking or answering with the digital ocean was mainly what is the state of the ocean today and maybe what it is tomorrow. So it's like a weather forecast or an ocean forecast. And what we want to do with the digital what we want to do with the digital twin of the ocean is that we have this ocean simulation, and I already said that we want this two-way interaction. So we want to use the observations, and we have the sensor data, we have the model, and we have the visualization as before. But what we want to do is use these what-if scenarios, and then assess the situation or assess the results from these what-if scenarios, and based on these information and knowledge, then intervene and create specific outcomes. So that means we run what-if scenarios, and then we assess the situation, and then we interact with the ocean, or we decide what we put in the ocean or what we not put in the ocean. And that is the main difference between the digital ocean and the digital twin of the ocean. So digital twins of the ocean, DITO, is supported by the G7, and there are a lot of things that digital twins of the ocean are supposed to accomplish. I think the two that I framed there is the main thing that we need to discuss and that what we want to discuss in the scope of this best practices. And it's nice, and we had a session yesterday evening already, and it's nice kind of that we converging with the idea where the digital twins are going and how we want to build the digital twins. And one is that we will have federated digital twins, so it's not one digital twin, it's many, and they must be interoperable to work together, but they are kind of on their own. And then another objective for digital is that we have this common understanding of the digital twins of the ocean architecture. And I will come back to that because that is exactly what Turtle is. So there was the first summit, G7 summit already. It was in London this year in May, and there will be one next year in China, hosted by China. Digital works in several working groups. And these working groups kind of follow the value chain of digital twins. So we have the observation and data systems, and then we have the modeling, data analytics, prediction engines. Somewhere we have to store. So even if we have federated systems, somewhere needs data, the data needs to be stored. And here the data interoperability is very important. Then we want to interact with the data, of course, we want to do something with the data. One main thing of digital twins is that we use the best available technology to work with these twins, and that means also best available technology and for visualization. So we're not only talking about graphs and pictures, but 3D visualization, augmented reality, and so forth. Then we have the framework, architecture, design, and implementation, because it's not only data interoperability, it's model interoperability, it's storage interoperability, visualization interoperability, and so forth. And DITO also looks into education and training and outreach into end communication. So what is Turtle? When we started this work last year with DITO, and there were several other projects starting to work on digital twins, and one of them is a project that I work in, it's called Iliad, but we also have the public platform in the EU, which is creating the public core for the digital twin of the ocean, called that DITO. Then there is something which is called the BioDT. We have a Blue Cloud project, which collects a lot of data and wants to make that available for digital twins. We have the Ocean Data Action Coalition. We have the Ocean Data Coordination Group, IODE, the EU Commission. Everybody is kind of looking into what can we do to data and how can we use it for digital twins. And this is when Martin J. Berman and I thought, why don't we make a project which will facilitate that these people who work with digital twins talk about the architecture and how we can make this happen. So Turtle is a project under DITO, which facilitates that we talk about interoperability architectures. Now we are in something that is called a best practice workshop. So best practices are important. In the project that I work, we have a dedicated task which looks into best practices for digital twins. We also have a work package that looks a lot into how can we make digital twins interoperable, because also in this project we have different digital twins. So we look into creating ontology, semantics, a data space, and the visualization, everything that needs to be interoperable. And as Jay said it, we want to develop a compendium of best practices, standards, and ontologies for digital twins of the ocean. Yesterday we had a session already, and I picked two highlights from these. So we had Martin Hovevik from Esri talking about how Esri is working with digital twins, and I captured this slide from him because I think that is very important. So earlier we had a kind of one clearinghouse, one catalog where you could look up where things are. Then it moved on to federated catalogs, but it still is very difficult to find things. And now we have even more complicated data constructs. We have data spaces, data meshes, data fabrics. So everything goes together from very, very many different sources. And we have to think about very carefully how we can make this useful if we want this to use this for digital twins, for the data analytics and so forth. So this is one important point. So I can only encourage you to look into the folder of yesterday's session once we have put the presentations there. Another one, another presentation that we had yesterday was the one from Louis de Meyer from UNESCO. Louis is leading the Ocean Data Coordination Group, and what he said is very many people look into this visualization, the end user delivery, and so forth, but that is actually only the peak of the iceberg, and we have to be very careful to also organize things that are below the water, so the iceberg that is below the water. And I think that was also very important. Also very good presentation from Louis yesterday. And then Pierluigi rounded up with some discussions on that. So you can become a partner of the Ditto program. So go to the Ditto website and then you can join the community. Sintip has just done that, so we were part of that, and a lot of other partners, and I think there are even more partners than on these slides. And that was it. So with that, I want to transit to our today's great speakers. We will start with Marjolaine. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Who will talk about South Africa's marine information management system. Then we have Jeroen, then we have Justin, and then we have Dick, if that is okay. That's it. So I think I will stop sharing. I would like to ask the speakers, first I have to find my controls here. Stop sharing. There you are back. So if the speakers could start with giving a short introduction to yourself as well, that would be great. So then I don't have to do that. And with no further ado, Marjolaine is starting. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So my name is Marjolaine Krug. I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm employed at the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment in the Oceans and Coast branch. And I'll be presenting on some of our efforts here in South Africa in data management. And this is actually a part of the work that is overseen by my colleague, Mr. Tikana Raselomi. And he works we're in the same team essentially. So just to get started. All right. So just to give a little bit of a context, in South Africa, we've established a system called the Oceans and Coastal Information Management System, or OSIMS. And this was funded really to improve ocean governance and protection and promote the growth of the blue economy. And as part of this effort, we've established a number of what we call decision support tools that provide essentially services to ocean users and try and improve the way we govern the ocean. So some of the tools that have been implemented support fisheries and aquaculture, the operations at sea, marine spatial planning, and things like maritime domain awareness. And this group established, these decision support tools are established in collaboration with what we call technical advisory groups. So we constantly interact with the stakeholders that guide the development of the system. So this is a project that has a long-term vision. We have done 5 years, we're still very new, and we now starting the second phase of 5 years for the OSIMS. And it's also a system built on multiple partnerships. It serves at the moment essentially government institutions, but we also provide services to industry in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, and also non-profit organization. So as part of this effort, we have also established a dedicated data center and IT infrastructure, essentially to provide the support to these OSIMs. And this center, the MIMS, was implemented by another research institute in South Africa called the South African Environmental Observation Network, SEON. And so this is a partnership with SEON and DFFE and our departments. And this is what I'll be talking mostly about today. So the MIMS is an open archival information system repository that archives and publishes collections and a subset of marine-related data. Essentially, at the moment, for us, for the department, Oceans and Coast Branch, but we also welcome other data sets from other stakeholders if there's a need. The infrastructure is owned by ourselves, and it will be expanded as the need grows. And we don't really have a complete failover system at the moment. We've got backup facilities, but the idea is to build a complete failover system over the next 5 years. And we also plan to use this infrastructure to support some of our product development and the running of very small-scale operational ocean models. So we store different kind of data sets, geographic multidimensional data sets, biological data, or simple metadata. And we adhere to both the South African data standards as well as the international standards, such as Darwin 4 or extended Darwin 4. Yes. So the system is built on a combination of trust and fair. So transparency is achieved by providing, publicly accessible evidence of the services that the repository does and does not offer. And responsibility is the commitment to provide reliable data services. And the user community is the commitment to implement and enhance the standards and norm of the user community, etc. So essentially, these are the guidelines that help us develop the system, that we use to develop the system. And as well, we have policies, and that's to support the long-term preservation of the data. We have data management planning in terms of requirements, and we try to work with standardized services, vocabularies, and practices. And as well as much as possible, we encourage open data, but sometimes we have also embargo on the data, but we try to limit the length of the embargoes when that is the case. And one of the challenges, is really to try and persuade data holders to share the data with us. So the system is essentially trying to build trust with the people who collect the data, trust not only in the system, but trust also that we will not publish data without the full agreement, and that it's more of a negotiation and trying to explain the benefit of being on such a system, both for backups as well as safety, but as well as opportunity for collaborations and research, for example. One of the things we've done that's actually been quite good for us is that, in South Africa, there's a lot of data collection that happens at a fairly low level, is that you have some data that used to still be collected on paper logs and shared through PDFs. And you can imagine that a lot of the data has mistakes or get lost, etc. So one of the efforts we're leading is to provide data apps. So one of the examples at the moment is that we've got this partnership with the National Pollution Laboratory, and they have monitors going into the fields and collecting information on the water quality, so chemical information. And then those monitors essentially enter directly on the data app, the output of their measurements. And the idea is that straight away the data is coordinated, the metadata information is correct, and then we can access this data much quicker than if we were to go through the old ways, which were data logs, for example, or everybody had a different Excel sheet or something like that. So this has been quite useful for us, and we're also using it in real time to support disaster management for things like, at the moment, we've got avian influenza outbreak affecting seabirds. And so this allows coordination across all the different stakeholders and non-profit organization, governance, municipalities that are involved in these efforts. So in terms of the way we try to work is that obviously we don't want to work in isolation. We want to be integrated within the global system. and the national node for the IOD, and we've just actually received a confirmation that we've been approved as a IOD associate data unit. We also the repository for the Southern African Data Center for Oceanography. So it's a lot of historical data, not just in South Africa, but also in Namibia and Angola. We host the IOD AfroBees. At the moment, we don't have that much biological data on the system, but it's something that we're hoping to grow. And the system is still fairly new. We only got the portal in 2020, and then we had an interruption in the procurement services of working with Seon. So we're starting again. So I'm actually anticipating that the next 5 years we'll see a huge growth in the amount of data on the MIMS. We're part of the Anchor project, which is the work package 5 on Atlantic Cooperation for Ocean Research and Innovation and Information Data Sharing. And at a regional level, we do have meetings with people who are developing a data management system as part of the Benguela Current Commission or YMSA, so they are aware of what we do. And the idea is that all these different data centers can communicate with each other. So just to summarize, this is the MIMS, and we work with common data and metadata structures, sharing protocols, and adhering to international standards. And we have, significant challenges. At the moment, actually, the website is down because we're struggling with the hosting solution for the data center, and I'm actually trying to move it to a tier 3 facility. So it's not a road without bumps, but I think we're going in the right direction, and I'm confident that the next 5 years we'll see a lot of development in this area. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magdalene. I would propose that we wait with the questions until all speakers have done their talks, if that is okay. Of course, everybody is free to write your questions in the chat. I see there is a discussion ongoing already between Jeroen and Luigi on my semantics. That is totally okay. This is what we are here for. But I would like to ask Jeroen just to continue with the next presentation, if that would be okay.
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Thank you, Magdalene.
Now it works, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna say something about BioDT, Biodiversity Digital Twin. So I'm Jeroen Broekhuizen. I work at TNO, which is the Dutch Research Institute. I know nothing about biodiversity, so let's state that up front. I try and know a lot about digital twins, and I also know that I don't know a lot about digital twins. Both fine. So I called this small talk Digital Twins for Nature, because that's, I think, what we're trying to do. And let's try and make those digital twins for nature interoperable, which is, I think, a big challenge. So this is based on BioDT, as I said, and we just started in June. So it's all quite fresh, but the first things have been trickling in, so we're getting the first results there. So first, very briefly, I'd like to outline the goal of BioDT, and that is to support the research infrastructures for biodiversity by making this first prototype digital twin, and that twin should drive both science and use cases and connect different other EU twins and initiatives. So that's basically the summary of the whole project, which I think is quite nice because it says research infrastructures, which are the users of the twin. And it's about creating a prototype because they've never before created something or attempted something like this. And which is very interesting to me, it's supposed to drive science, which is very different from a traditional asset-based digital twin. So as I said, different research infrastructures. We have 4 on board in the consortium: DISCO, GBIF, LifeWatch, and Alter, all focusing on biodiversity. And I have to say, mostly land-based biodiversity, but some also cover marine life biodiversity. And we have a whole slew of universities connected to those research infrastructures that are doing the actual biology work or ecology work, depending on which field you're interested in. And then on the other side, there's all kinds of EU initiatives and EU twins, and for example, ECMWF or European Science Cloud. And there is HPC infrastructures, for example, by CSC or IT4I, who are all doing supercomputing, and myself being more focused on the twins and how we create these prototypes. I think that's very interesting. As I said, I use this image usually for manufacturing, where I'm most of my time active creating twins, where it's been going on for quite a while longer. And there we have 4 perspectives on these twins, either in the design of some kind of product that you're making, what you're doing in the value chain to somehow make that product happen, and a production process where you actually make the product. And then once you've made it and it turns into usage, how do you then manage whatever you sold to someone? And of course, if you look at nature, nature doesn't behave in this way at all. So it's fundamentally different in way of thinking. We're designing nature. We don't have a value chain in nature. We don't have a production process in nature, and we don't have asset management in nature. Well, at the same time, we have similar things in nature. We manage forests. We design strategies to manage forests. We use forests to create wood and create furniture. So there's actually a value chain there. And there's a production process in harvesting that wood and making that. So actually, maybe it's quite similar. And so I think that's the interesting part in how we can look at things. But from a science perspective, it's very different. And that's because science has a different goal, because this is all human-driven activity, while science is more looking into how can we capture the nature-driven activity. And I think those are 2 different types of things. And one part is, I don't have a fancy graphic yet, it's in the making. So at the bottom, we have nature, the environment, flora, fauna, weather, all kinds of stuff. We're trying to capture that nature in some way by monitoring infrastructures or citizen science or other kinds of things. That data is going into the research infrastructures and being used by scientists to come up with new ideas on how we can somehow understand nature. So can we capture the knowledge that is somehow in our heads into all kinds of models, replicas, whatever we want to call it? And maybe that's a species model or a climate model or an environmental model or a model about policy, something how species interact. Maybe it's about pollution and how that affects nature. And we want to see whether what we capture digitally on nature, if that really matches with the nature. So does that actually validate what's going on? And at the same time, on the right side, we humans tend to do all kinds of stuff to nature. And can we use those models in the middle to somehow predict what will happen and how will we affect nature when we do something, either when we build stuff where we live or where we pollute or where we use nature for our resources. So maybe coming back to this, the definition semantics, I'd like to somehow break down twins in different parts because it makes more sense that way. So either we have just data, which is already there, or we're talking about the noun digital twin, which is a replica of something. We have all kinds of applications for digital twins, and that's on top of all of these replicas. And the whole thing together, let's call that then a digital twin, which is actually the paradigm, which is the combination of data, one or more replicas, and an application. It has its own life cycle, and let's call the whole thing digital twinning. And I'm going a bit fast here, but I think my time is limited, so I could talk for hours on this. Let's see how we do that for the BioDT project. So we have all kinds of replicas, either for bees, species interaction, environmental dependencies, extinctions, etc., all kinds of models. We're trying to speed those up using GPU, HPC, etc. Wrap those models in a way that they become executable. Put them in life cycles so that there's versioning, CI/CD, testing, validation, all those kinds of aspects covered. We need to feed those models with data, and we need to link the combination of data model in an application so that we can actually do these kind of scenarios, patterns, make them interactive. And if we're lucky, we can also link this part with other data coming from other twins, or maybe even other models. So that's very briefly what's going on. And so coming back to this capture data, capture nature, understanding nature, and affecting nature, it's kind of follows this same kind of breakdown. And this prototype, we're wanting to somehow allow users from research infrastructures to use those twins. And the interesting thought was when I was preparing this in terms of interoperability. So we have different frameworks for interoperability in the EU. One is from, I think, the EIF, a European Interoperability Framework. There's EOSC, which I already said is a partner in this consortium that has their interpretation of this EIF. And to make that tangible for science data. And then there is like the interoperability levels, talking about having no interoperability at level 0 or some technical interoperability, then going into the semantics, which we've been discussing in the chat. And then even higher up, that we are actually able to have the same kind of similar business. 247 that deals with digital twin integration and interoperability framework, and they created a reference architecture. It's still very abstract and high level, but it's at least a nice step. And in terms of semantics, many of our partners, what I see happening is they're focusing on fair digital objects in terms of describing the data. Sorry for my cough. So these are all European initiatives on interoperability that are currently going on. And then the question is, how do we apply this in this context? Because there's many different options for interoperability. I think it's already covered a bit by Ute. So data interoperability, interoperability between models or replicas or workflows, application interoperability, interoperability between twins, the infrastructure that they run on, and also in the way we capture the life cycles of these twins and make that interoperable. And the question is, why do we need this interoperability? And I think that's basically because we want to somehow find all of this data, all of these twins in a federated way. And that means we need to understand each other if we want to exchange and share what's going on. And otherwise, we can't query this data in a meaningful way. We can't understand what the models actually do or assess any kind of quality. And so we need all kinds of metadata to make this happen. And I think that's really important. So, for example, in the BioDT project, we're hoping to, and let's start at the bottom, some examples. Usually what I see a lot, scientists have all kinds of code on their laptops. How can we wrap that, containerize that in a meaningful way so that it both runs on the cloud or on HPCs or on the laptop of scientists, regardless of what they need to do, depending on their constraints? And how can we make that same code base run on all these different platforms? That's also a form of interoperability. We're trying to link the output of ECMWF with the weather models to the habitats and ecosystem for in this case, land-based species. So what do we actually need? And do we need to tap into the climate model and run scenarios there based on species? Or are we happy with just the output of these models? So that's an open question. That's something we're trying to figure out. And if we're gonna create tools for these workflows, can we make those reusable for also other types of workflows? Or can we make scaling better? So that actually scientists don't have to bother with all of this because this is not their field. And I think that's a very important part. We need to hide and abstract all this complicated stuff, I would say, to make life for scientists easier. And I think that's a big goal that we're trying to achieve. And that's going to be a hard goal also. So hopefully by doing these things, we can make a first step, make a first approach. And like I said in the chat earlier, in this domain, there aren't that many best practices yet. But if you look at other domains like energy or manufacturing, those kind of best practices have been there for at least 5 years. So we can reuse many of those. I think that's where I want to end my talk. So glad to be here, glad to learn from all of you, and hopefully turn that into practice.
Thank you, Jeroen. I understand now that we have to be extra grateful that you are here and get well or get better soon. But thanks for giving that presentation. Very interesting. I have loads of questions. I just haven't had the time to put them in the chat yet. So next in line would be Justin, who gives us a presentation on the information management framework. Justin.
Sure. Thank you very much.
And we have 3 quarters left, and we also have Dick. So if we could hold it to 10 to 15 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem. Should be getting my screen. Get a big scary stakeholder map now. There we go. And you get the presentation.
Yes, not yet in presentation mode, but otherwise we see it.
How's that?
That is super.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you for the invite to present here, and I'll come back to why I'm so keen to present here at the end, because I think there's input I need from this community. So what I'm going to be showing is within the National Oceanography Centre and the UK, our funding council has been putting us on this very short funding cycle where we've been doing projects for 6 months, delivering results, then we're on another project which is for 12 months. So I'm going to show the results of a very short project and then the beginning of a new project which is will last for a year. And we're working on environmental digital twins, and it's a cross domain. So oceans are part of that. And it's actually cross-domain development of digital twins within the UK. And I'm going to come back to how that fits in the bigger picture at the end. You see, this is the work of many. I'm merely the presenting author here. I'm a co-A on the projects, but we have the input of people from across at least 4 different disciplines contributing to this work. So everybody's got a slide at the beginning that says, what is digital twin? I think the key thing that we're working on and the key concept that we're taking through this work is it's a tool to improve decisions, but our more formal definition is a virtual representation of a physical asset enabled through data and simulators for real-time prediction, optimization, monitoring, controlling, and improved decision-making. Our kind of motivation on this is to generate tools for the community that enables them to improve their decision-making. And in order to develop this, we have a concept called information management framework, and this has 5 goals. The first is to establish a shared vision for digital twins. The second is to develop a conceptual framework. Third is to agree and implement digital commons. And a digital commons is the approach that we see as a means to actually develop digital twins in a collaborative way. And it follows published approaches in developing based on commons. Delivering demonstrators. So what's the point of doing this work unless you're actually delivering demonstrators and tangible benefits to communities? So demonstrators are key to actually taking this forward, so we can demonstrate the benefit and then iterate those and actually develop them further. And then also developing the components of the digital twin. So I'll come to it later, but digital twin is built up with many components, from ontologies to software to standards to interfaces, and effectively each of these components need to be developed. So information management framework is effectively a framework which enables us to develop digital twins that the community needs, and it effectively it's the rules of engagement that we're setting for the UK. And we've got this representation on the right here, where this is effectively everything we kind of see in terms of the components we need to develop. So we've got the pilot studies here. We've got effectively the components with the twin themselves, data, the interfaces, the commons, which is where we developing those components, architecture, security, management, governance. And then I'll come back to how we come to Agile later. So that's kind of the introductory slide. I'm going to now show the results of the first project, which we ran from October through to March. And our funding council effectively wanted to produce a roadmap for how we can actually develop this information management framework. And we took 2 approaches within the project. We actually had what we call the top-down approach, which started from the theory, and then we had kind of the bottom-up approach, which kind of started from what the existing landscape was. So our models, what ontologies we've got, what governance already exists. We've also seen use cases, because use cases are key to this process. I should come to in a second. And we actually brought the top-down and the bottom-up together and to produce a model as effectively and a model and our roadmap to develop our digital twins. And the bottom-up side, we looked at different scales, from local twins to national scale twins to regional to global, across the disciplines. Oceans up here at top. Oceans actually more advanced than many of the other components that are going into that are feeding into digital twin. With the terrestrial side actually not far behind in some respects. And then in terms of capabilities, so you've got things like from modeling to machine learning, visualization is key. We need to actually make these accessible to non-experts. By non-experts, I mean non-experts on the digital side, but potentially experts in the scientific fields that are using the twins. The machine-to-machine access, they need to run in real time, user control workflows. And then we also looked at the landscape around as to all the things to kind of work with. Ditto's there. BioGT, you've seen it's in something later. Blue Cloud is there. Jupyter Science Cloud. And then from that, we actually chose our 3 use cases. And these are our 3 use cases that we used in that project. The first is what we call 3DT. It's run by the Met Office, and it's a dispersion model for effectively. So say there's a release of a pollutant in a city, and it's a dispersion model which enables them to make decisions based on the spread of that dispersion. Land Insight, which effectively is carbon and water in soil and soil moisture, and it feeds into things like flood monitoring, IPCC assessment, and then we've got what we call the Antarctic Digital Twins. So British Antarctic Survey are developing a suite of digital twins covering Antarctica, and a big part of that's to optimize the new ship. We just purchased a brand new ship. It burns quite a lot of fuel, and with the push to net zero, they need to optimize its pathways and its navigation in order to reduce the fuel that it's consuming. So they're developing the digital twins to do that, to facilitate that. So around that, they're effectively, as I say, there's different elements. And I think the key message from this analysis was that not all interoperable elements are required for all use cases. So you don't necessarily need to have the full interoperability between all these three twins, but you do need to have the exchange of data from the atmospheric dispersion model to land insight and Antarctic twins. This is the top-down work. We're actually doing a new iteration of this, which we'll come to in a second. And this identified the key elements which you develop and how you build them. First one, we've got the data and the interoperability of the data, the presentation, that's key. Alongside, you've got the management governance and the security and support. And then in the middle, we've got this asset commons for data models, methods, and workflows. This asset commons is what we see as kind of that central repository of assets to enable the community to work together on those. And then we've actually got cloud native services at the base of this, which effectively means that anything you build can be deployed on most people's architecture. And this built on what was the precursor to the work, which was by the Centre for Digital Built Britain, which was the pathway towards an information management framework. We adapted that for the environmental domain, and this was what we ended up with. Our outcome was our roadmap. We actually charted the steps needed to develop an IMFE. It needs to be modular, it needs to be incremental, and we need to build and sustain a community, which is a key to me presenting here. This roadmap is now openly available online, and there's a QR code here if you want to get a copy, or the link. I'll share the slide later. And we made that available 3 months ago. Our funding council liked what we did, and they came back with us with another year of funding. So we've just started a new project. This is why some of the colours in these slides are slightly odd, because I'm between projects and between branding, which is why some of the colours look quite strange. But we've just started the project, which runs from October this year to November next year. We have a year, and in that year, we're being very ambitious. I'm going to start from the middle. So the first bit is we're going to develop out a fourth use case, and that's a Hague-FRAS ocean seabed imagery digital twin. In the middle, we're going to build a generalizable information management framework. And that's going to pull in assets and elements from the Hague-FRAS work in this project, and the existing and other digital twins, hopefully. And then we're going to iterate this top-down framework which I showed, and make that more accessible and easier for you to interact with. We've got stakeholder engagement on the left-hand side, and communities of practice is key. And I'll come back to it, but effectively, by the end of January, I need to make recommendations to the project, how we can make our asset register, connect it to existing communities of practice and all the communities in this room, so I don't have long. Our main outcomes. So we've got the IMFE framework. So this is effectively we're going to be publishing the framework which I showed in top-down analysis. We're going to be developing the IMFE services. Key one around this is asset register, and enabling the assets we develop and the assets within the community I'm working with to be available to other communities and other people to contribute. And we're going to actually produce a demonstrator to show the value of all this work. This is our new use case, which is marine biodiversity. It's built around so people talk about value chains. The key piece, the societal benefit, and this is the policy priority in terms of marine biodiversity. And we're using marine imagery to actually collect the data to monitor this. We're using infrastructure and platforms from other projects, and there's already existing work in the UK on Hague-FRAS and the monitoring of biodiversity. And we're looking at end-to-end workflow, mission planning, data processing, and decision-ready information for users and communities. In particular, we're looking at people like DEFRA in the UK who are responsible for the biodiversity reporting. And that means that effectively we can get continuous and timely assessment of that region, which effectively feeds into the Decade for Science, our G7 priorities, Seabed 2030. And there's some nice examples of imagery here. So I've kind of covered this a little bit already, but our expected project outcomes is we actually need need to actually develop our outreach. I'm going to flip screens. That one there. Here you can see our first draft stakeholder map. We see BioDT, Turtle, Esri, OBPS, Iliad. All the people in this meeting are already on this stakeholder map, and we need to be engaging with you as part of this work. And we're looking at how we can connect the work we do and the asset register we develop to communities of practice and enable work which contribute to it. We're going to be updating to publishing the theoretical work for the community, so we can get out there, which is one of the key outputs of the first project. We can get as far as publishing it, and that's due in 5 months' time. We're going to produce a first version of asset register, and the key thing about asset register is how do we connect this to things like the OBPS and related efforts and BioDT and everybody in this room. And then also have an exemplar case study on Hague FRAS. So you can see from this, the original picture I showed on the components we need to develop, you can see we actually work a stakeholder bit. We're developing a thin slice of the Agile Digital Twins, and we're developing a pilot study. And one last slide, I said this yesterday, I'm working on another piece of digital twins work around developing net zero oceanographic capability. And we have a stakeholder workshop on 24th of November, which people are welcome to join. And what we're going to do is we're looking at digital twins of the ocean, we're looking at digital infrastructure, looking at net zero observational equipment, for example, autonomy, gliders, AUVs, surface vehicles, and how we bind those together to actually move the UK from effectively where we are now, which is having ships which are producing a lot of carbon and working against our net zero goals, to a net zero infrastructure with effectively ships which are not to produce burning so much carbon, supported by a lot more autonomy. So if anyone's interested, the workshop's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Very interesting, and very nice that you reminded us of this workshop. You have a question in the chat, and this brings us to our last speaker, which is Dick Sharp, who will tell us about Blue Cloud and the plans for the digital twin. And I'm very excited to hear about that.
Yeah. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, not in presenting.
Yeah, now it's okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Now
you.
I want to show you something about the Blue Cloud, especially also, let's say, the planned activities forward in the coming years. First of all, let's say, I myself, I'm very much involved in data management infrastructures in the marine domain for a long time, decades already. Let's say we started in the 80s, more or less. And also I'm a technical coordinator of Sea Duitrenet, let's say one of the founders, which is quite a big network. Let's say in there we have now more than 100 data centers connected that all are working on collecting data in the different domains and making them more accessible and discoverable. Now, so if you look at data itself, let's say in the European domain, we did a study a couple of years ago as part of AWOODNet, and there we found out that we spent about 1.4 billion euro a year in Europe to collect data about the sea, let's say the surface and also the water, with many different platforms and sensors. And one part, of course, is remote sensing, let's say the Sentinel, etc., Copernicus, but the other part is really in situ, and that's a big variability of data sets in all kinds of disciplines. And also there are many, let's say, people your communities being served with all these data and of course the information you can derive from this data. So it means that in Europe, we built over time quite a landscape for data management, because if you spend 1.4 billion a year, you also need, of course, good management. And despite what some people still say that there's a chaos in data management, it's complete nonsense. We are maybe at 90% or 95% of our capabilities, which is quite an achievement. And over time, we built up very nice infrastructures. And that's a little bit depicted in this picture. You see, let's say on the bottom, on the left, you see those who are collecting data in many ways. And then in the middle, we have what we call the so-called data aggregators. And data aggregators, there are 3 big power blocks, in fact, in Europe, but also there are many others, let's say research infrastructures and others who are complementing this whole domain, because there are so many different types of data sets and communities that we really have to work together. And then on the top, we have, let's say, more the intermediate users, so those who are turning data into information, into knowledge, and of course on the top we have the end users. So there's a lot of activities going on. If you look at the Blue Cloud, we in fact we focus on that data part and also getting more out of the data. So we started this project as a federated project, and the idea is in fact to make a smart combination of data sets, analytical processes, but also computing resources, because we also do it as part of the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, to make a marine thematic contribution to EOSC. If you look at the overarching concept, in fact, there is 3 levels, you would say. One is that we try to bring together more and more data from the many repositories and the research infrastructures that are around. And that means that we have to apply open standards, also, let's say, make our own profiles, which fit then on OTC, ISO, etc. Let's say, and vocabularies, of course, by which we can make the data and the data more interoperable and more harmonized. And then on top of that, let's say, we're developing more and more these value-added services by having a virtual research environment, and which makes full use of all this data, but also, of course, has a lot of analytical processes and a lot of, let's call it, scientific genius to turn data into real information and make it ready for other users. So this is the concept that we're following, and we are working together in the Blue Cloud with a lot of leading blue data infrastructures, but also with leading infrastructures. On the left, you see many of those blue data infrastructures, let's say the different domains. And on the right, you see the infrastructures, which is in fact the Vecchio or the Copernicus, DIAS, also UDAT and D for Science. And also we're working together with EGI. So in fact, we have all the major partners also in the EOSC cloud infrastructure, etc. They are on board. The key products and services, we have 3. One is the Data Discovery and Access Service, which is a federation on top of the different blue data infrastructures. And then we have a virtual research environment where we provide a range of services to build, in fact, to set up workflows, to build virtual labs using the applications, but using also computing resources in many aspects, and also using, of course, the data. And then that culminates in a couple of virtual labs, which are the demonstrators, and they are also the use cases to demonstrate, let's say, how this virtual research environment can operate for you. And this virtual research environment is open. Let's say we invite other projects and also other, let's say, research communities, let's say, to make use of it, because we have a lot of resources to provide also in computing and hosting as well. So the VRE itself, it's let's say of course you're known with this concept. It's about collaboration, it's about sharing, it's about reuse and reproducibility. So it means that if you start a workflow, there also should be a provenance that you can follow how this result was made, what kind of data were used, what kind of processes were used. And this all has to be, let's say, published and available for end users, because that also is part of the fairness loop, that you know what you're dealing with. That's not only for data, but also for the products that are being made from the data. There is this space, let's say, the VRE. So there's many ways to set up your own space, or you have also community spaces, and you can work with different analytics, and you can also work, of course, with notebooks, Jupyter Hub, and so on, our studio. And we have developed 5 different virtual labs, and they are a little bit, let's say, also across domain, because one is about marine environmental indicators. It's more in the physical domain. Then we have aquaculture, which is more in blue economy, and then on the other side we have, let's say, also going down in plankton and in let's say the genomics, but also in the biodiversity, which are, because we try to especially also have a cross-discipline aspect, so that you can look at the environment, let's say, to see how biodiversities are developing over time, and so on. If we look at data, because this session is about data, I want to focus a little bit more on this Blue Cloud Discovery and Access service. What you see is on the top bar, you see, let's say, the different blue data infrastructures that we're looking at. And what we try to do with this federated discovery and access is to help users to find their way in these different infrastructures. So they don't have to go to the individual user interfaces, but in fact, we made a common interface to help you to go deeper into this data and in the end get the data itself. That's good for the users, of course, because that helps them to have a one-stop shop. On the other side, it's also good for the blue data infrastructure because they're all developing their own capabilities. They're developing their own networks of data originators, and then they can be very large networks. And of course, they need to be used and found, and also they have to be more, let's say, more and more get structured or streamlined with the others, because that's the only way how we can make a data space. And these are some of the data types. You see, it's quite diverse, and also in both in global, let's say, in geographical reach, but also in types of data. So, for instance, with CData, we have more than 6 disciplines, a couple of million data sets. Argo, we have also a couple of million, with which are, of course, the Argo floats. Eurobus is more biodiversity. Ecotaxa is microscopic, looking at taxa, and so on. So it's quite a diverse field that we're looking at. And what we did is that we said, let's do it in 2 steps. Let's say first, identify so-called interesting data collections. So you take these different blue data infrastructures, and they all can produce some sort of aggregated data collections, so that you have, let's say, maybe a couple of thousand entries and not millions of entries. And to do this, let's say we used a common model, and we used also the so-called DAP brokerage to turn everything into the ISO 19115 model. And so that you have a couple of common criteria, let's say, for searching. And after this first step, you have a second step, that because you find some of the repositories that they have interesting data sets for you, and they say, now I want to go deeper. And then, of course, you need more criteria, and which are also more specific to select the data repository. Because if you look at microscopic biology, it's quite different than if you look at looking for currents or for sea level. So you have different criteria, different tags, metadata tags, to be able to search and to find what you want. And that's this principle is done. It's all done by machine to machine. So we work together with all these different blue data infrastructures, and everything done with machine to machine. This is a little bit the picture. Let's say how it works. So we have the individual data centers. They have APIs or web services. We have a metadata brokerage. First, we do it at level 1. So we have this common model that helps you to find. And then secondly, you go back, let's say, to the second layer, which is then the API itself from the individual data repository. And this way, finally, you get your shopping basket together with all the data you want. And then we have a common delivery mechanism, which runs in the cloud to package all your data sets and deliver it in one go. And there's a human interface. There's also API, but there's also, of course, let's say, a link directly to the virtual research environment, so that the data that you collect can be used as part of your virtual research pool. Now, this is some slides, just quickly. This, let's say, the homepage, where you see the different federated infrastructures. This is level 1 search. Let's say from the level 1 search, you give some common criteria, like say where, when, how. And then you find, let's say, a number of data sets, and then you can go to the level 2. You can also look at the geographical side, let's say in an abstract sense, in the collections, but then you go deeper in this case in Argo, and then you find, let's say, individual data sets that you like, and those you can then put in a shopping basket, and then you can get your delivery. What you see is in this interfacing, and that's the interesting thing, is that all these different research or blue data, they all have their own web services or APIs, but they all use different, I would say, different systems. And nowadays, everybody tells you, well, I have an API, so that means I'm standardized. That's not the case at all. We're just starting. It's the same with data formats. We have now all kinds of web services with different functionalities and different technological implementations. And that's something that we learned from this, that we did a lot of, let's call it customizing or plumbing, I call it. But what we have to do, of course, in the next stage is try to harmonize a little bit more, let's say, the functionality, at least the functional specifications of each of these web services, so that you really can follow the same workflow if you want to do discover and access and download the data. So that's one thing that we learned from this. Another thing is, by building the Blue Cloud, we really got a lot of traction. So we had a lot of momentum, a lot of scientists. Also, the hackathon that we did was very successful. And built on this, let's say we were managed to submit a new proposal, Blue Cloud 226, and that's starting now the 1st of January for another 4 years. And what we want to do is, let's say, develop further the the Blue Cloud infrastructure, that it really becomes what we call a federated European ecosystem to deliver fair and open data, but also analytical services and also, let's say, of course, the computing resources. And what we did is we expanded the consortium from 20 to 40 partners. We have more blue data infrastructure on board, so also EMSO, EMBSC, CEOS, Immunet Physics, and Jericho Core have entered the arena, I would say, and they'll become part of the federation. And also we have also EGI now, let's say, officially on board, next to UDAT, next to Vecchio, next to Devo Science. So we really have all the major players for the EOS cloud also together. And what we want to do, especially for data access, let's say to build upon what we have done so far, is that we want to expand the service. So getting more blue data infrastructures in the federation, but also adding semantic brokerage, because of course all these different blue data infrastructure, they use their own terminology, and as long as you look at geographical, let's say, space and time, that's not a problem. But if you look at also at platforms and devices and parameters and so on, you really need some mapping and some ontologies, and that's something that we want to apply, and we make much use of the capabilities that have been developed as part of CDataNet in this domain, let's say, especially by BDC, the CDataNet vocabularies. And let's say that will be applied. Then another thing is that we also found, of course, that so far in the federation, we work with, we call it packages. So it's like you have a blue data infrastructure, it's like a supermarket, they have their own products. And what you do is you have in fact a catalog of the products. So you identify the product and then you download the whole product. But what we also see is there's other users, especially in the labs, that they want to work more according to data subsetting. So that means that they want slices which are more horizontal than just getting the full package. And that's something that we want to develop more and more, that in addition to the other method, the full product, so that you really can say, I want to see all the temperature data at, let's say, 20 meters below sea level, but then from all the different sources, and I want them all in the package in one go. And there are some very nice developments there. That's also technical, let's say, to get very good performance. And that's something that we want to add to, let's say, add to the data discovery and access. And on top of that, because, or I would say more in, as a next step, if you have this capability, you can also feed this into so-called semi-automatic workbenches that then help you to compile the data sets, first the data sets, but then also to elaborate those data sets and turn them into validated aggregated data collections. And especially then, of course, focusing on selected data types, essential ocean variables. And what we have said, or I say for now, that we will develop workbenches for temperature and salinity, that's physics, also for nutrients, chlorophyll, and pH and oxygen in the, let's say, in the chemistry domain, but also for plankton dynamics and biodiversity and biomass, especially in the biological domain. And those data sets, of course, they are essential ocean variables, and it means that if we can create them data lakes, which are being refreshed every time there's new data coming in through all the pipes, let's say the pipes from the different research infrastructures, then you really are creating data lakes which have very valuable data collections and which can immediately be used, of course, by the Blue Cloud virtual labs, but also by research communities. But also, in fact, and that's already happening, let's say, as part of Immunet Chemistry, also by the MSFD, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and all the, let's say, the ones who use that data to do assessments and make indicators. And of course, the idea then also is that these same data lakes will be a very good, let's say, contribution to feed to the digital twins of the oceans, because they will represent the output from all these, let's say, blue data infrastructures that work together to build those, I would say, unique and harmonized data lakes for those specific parameters. And that's the way that we look at this. There is this picture, let's say, a pictogram, I would say, of the ecosystem. And I don't want to tell you how it all works, but the idea is simply to say we set up a flow. So we look at the base, which are originators' data. Their data is being maintained or captured, I would say, and curated by these research infrastructures and by these blue data infrastructures. From there, let's say the data is selections are being made. They go into the workbench. There we have experts, but we also have artificial intelligence, and we have also other analytical processes. And that results in, let's say, harmonized and validated data collections. And those collections for EUVs are then made available in a data lake or data lakes, and then serve the wider community. So I hope that you're interested now in Blue Cloud, and therefore I want to also ask you to join 8 December. We have a special day, in fact, finalizing the first Blue Cloud. It will be a day in Brussels with a lot of also people from the EU, let's say, invited and present. And what we want to do is there give you more information about all the results that we have achieved in the first 3 years, but also give you an outlook, let's say, to the further steps that we're going to do, which start immediately the 1st of January. So I hope I gave you a nice overview, and I'm open for questions, of course.
You did. Thank you, Dick. That was very interesting. Wow, that was a lot of information. I see.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No. Not only you. All the speakers gave us great insights into their project, and I was very happy to hear about this. So this was great. And I saw in parallel there is a great discussion going on in the chat as well. So Pierluigi, you facilitated that discussion or triggered this discussion in the chat.
Yeah, I saw we were running out of time, so I said let's have a discussion in parallel.
That is super. But would you be able to kind of take the highlights or summarize what's going on in the chat?
No.
No,
But essentially, no. There's quite a lot of material in there. I think it's good to copy that if we can and put it into our document. If nobody minds, of course, to put it there. But it was quite far-reaching, largely talking about, number one, getting our conceptual model straight. That framework that was shown, Justin, I think you showed it. We need some conceptual interoperability first, so that we know what we're talking about and what kind of interoperability we're building. Is it interoperability between the models talking to each other, the twin talking to a model, a twin talking to a data flow that's coming in various standards, NetCDF, etc. Then we see that from the biodiversity world, it's not a problem only in biodiversity. The interoperability is a bit of a mess because most of the standards organizations were grassroots. They came up from researchers saying, we can't take this anymore. Let's put out some standards and work, which is a good step, but they're not professional standards organizations. Some of them are. The Genomic Standards Consortium has just registered as a legal entity. TADWIG went through that process earlier. So I think that's the level of conversation we need. But what often happens, especially with project level funding, in the EU, yes, also in the US to a degree, Australia is similar. An infrastructure will get a grant to make something fair, but that often creates a silo, right? Now, that's also necessary because you need to do that with your stakeholders. Jerome had a question in there saying, well, can't we do this at source? Well, try to get some of those people in the field to standardize metadata. It's not going to work very well. That has to be minimal, quick, and light. And then the infrastructures have to uplift that at a local or national level or regional level, and then get ready, and that's what's missing right now, get ready to interoperate globally with each other. What we happened, and we had this at the UN Ocean Conference, we had some infrastructure representatives there from EatModNet, the South African networks, SEON, and the IMOS from Australia and others. You get a kind of regional flavor of a standard, right? So it would be the IMOS NetCDF. This is necessary to a certain degree, but that's then our challenge. How do we bridge these things so that twins can talk to each other a bit more effectively? One thing that I showed yesterday, we don't have time to go through the whole presentation of the discussion.
Can I interfere maybe? Because
yes, because I saw you were shaking your head while you
because I don't share his vision at all. Sorry. I just tried to explain to you that we've been working for more than 30 years in building a very good structured information system in Europe.
I get that.
And we really can, and the Blue and the DTO can really benefit from this and not try to reinvent wheels, please. Don't do this. But you make use of this.
When we query,
look at how many people are organized and how many institutes and how many data sets are already flowing around with common structures and common formats.
So working with IODE,
it's amazing. So don't start this story again about chaos and all these things, because I don't like this. I really don't.
Chaos.
I think it's also quite stupid to do it like this.
Well, the main issue is if I try to query a European infrastructure or an Australian one, I can't effectively at the moment cross-query between them. That's the main issue. It's not to say that these things aren't valuable, certainly not. And it's not to say that they can't feed into twins at a certain level. But when we're talking about global solutions, we need to then have a very simple benchmark. Can I do this exchange between the regions? Now, I've totally acknowledged it. Like, these regions are getting their assets.
Sorry, but I did the project for 6 years with Australia, with the US, with the European leading infrastructures, and we achieved a lot of interoperability. It's called Ocean Data Interoperability Platform. You can find all the conclusions on the web. 6 years we worked together and we really made common standards, and we also found interoperability solutions.
So then if I have an agent,
language perfectly, no problem at all.
So if I haven't, so where do I look now to search across these digital assets? So that's the question. Like the outcome, of course, there are very impressive projects that have happened, but what is now sustainable from that? In the sense, some of the standards have been set, some of the things have been aligned, but where can I point my machine to now that can query across the partners that were in this project?
I think you said it's on the web. Can you post a link into the chat, for example?
Yeah, I will, but I tried, sorry, but I said we spend 1.4 billion euro a year in Europe, said, to collect data. That means that we really need data management, because if we don't have data management, this money is not well spent.
Absolutely.
So it means that most of the data is findable, accessible, and we already also made very good progress in getting it into common containers or whatever you like to call it. And this really works, because look at the AWOODNet and the Copernicus output is largely based upon that input. And those are very good products, and they're only being made because there's high quality data input for them to work with these.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and there's also a continuous flow of data, because it's a dynamic process, very operational. It's not the other thing is what we see is that there are maybe some groups, let's call scientists sometimes, who are not yet part of that mainstream information system. But that's something we work on, and that's why we have also data AWOODNet ingestion and other initiatives, let's say, by which we try to reach out to others in society that also could join the same, let's call trunk lines, to make their data more accessible and available in a fair way.
Yeah, I don't think there's disagreement
we
there.
are working on fairness, so we go deeper and deeper to the sources of data, also to sensor web and all these kind of things, try to get more and more tags on the metadata by which the data becomes more fair, because you have to start at let's say, at the beginning of the pipe. And this way, we really also globally, we work in RDA, we work in IODE and others, let's say we really work on this to get closer and closer together. But let's say you should not say, if you cannot find something, that you immediately say that everything is wrong, because that's a very strange perception.
No, and that's also not
don't share this, because I've been building infrastructure for my whole life, and we always have very good products out of it, good data out of it. Maybe Justin, you can also let's say testify a little bit on this, because you should not make a caricature of the situation. Sorry, don't do this.
I don't think we disagree here, actually, but and there has been very good projects, as Pierluigi is saying, but I don't think we are there that we can say we have solved this problem for the world and for the global data community.
But it will continue, but like I say, we make steps. We are maybe at 90%.
And to be quite clear, Dick, I was very clear to say that the regional organizations are getting things in order. There have been wonderful demonstrations of interoperability, but we need them to be lasting now, especially for things like the digital twins, and also in any domain in biodiversity. We have wonderful examples of things working for a while, standards being influenced. This is how TADWIG also grew through GBIF and OBPS and others. But now, when we're actually developing this, we have an opportunity to kind of skip ahead and say, okay, what worked from those projects and what can we implement now in terms of a framework so that we can accelerate it? And one of the things,
that's what all these big projects are about. That we got a lot of funding in the last rounds for all these big projects.
Often, but then
nothing is stalling, Luigi, but it's continuing.
Often the issue is those projects are continuing. They do develop their own internal standards, but what's missing, and this is what also Louis presented yesterday from IODE, the way that the decade is organizing its various layers of interoperability, those projects globally, from the observation layers, the modeling, the twinning, the applications, they need to be able to project into a space that's predictable for others then to pull data out, right? So that's also what then IODE will try to do with this Decade Coordination Office, but it doesn't have to be through IODE. It's mostly that this multi-regional convention building is happening so that the standards have a way of, let's say, projecting into something more common. And then the digital twins will participate in such a system and become nodes in the system. That's ultimately—
Maybe Justin wants to say something before the time is over. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand. Thank you, Dick, for pointing that out.
Okay. I think I'm okay with this. I have exactly these challenges on the projects I'm working on, because I am working on effective projects. I'm running on 6-monthly or annual cycles or less for money at the moment. And I think I'm not going to talk about data interoperability much. I agree with Dick, we've made huge amounts of progress on the marine side. I think that's it's a case of making sure that's connected to the outside world in a way that's readily accessible. But for the twins work, for the projects I'm on, we need to get this asset register and this asset commons in a place the entire community can access and connect to. And the reason I'm showing it here is to identify the people to gather those requirements for that asset commons. And we have 13 months to not only gather requirements, but to build, publish, and get this to the outside world, which means we need a set of minimum standards, a minimum criteria that would actually make those services accessible. I'm also working on a piece of work in the background about sustainability. I don't see this, what we're producing, as something that should be owned by the project at the end. I've actually found a government agency that'd be perfect to host it, and I'm not going to say who they are because they've not spoken about it yet. But we think, and it's from the built environment actually. So they're developing lots of built environment twins in the UK, and we think that we should actually be trying to host this service on the built environment twins because they're the sustainable organisation that will have some longevity. And as we develop these standards, they're going to be developed by use cases and communities, which means that you're not going to get that full interoperability that's needed. But Alexandra, who most of you know, is going to be working on the ontology side. And I think one of the key things is the top level and the mid-level ontologies need to be aligned. Once they're aligned, we can then facilitate the interoperability across the twins. That work has a way to go. So I agree with Pierre's questions, the key for the sustainability future. I agree with Dick Schaap that on the marine side, we have made huge strides and massive progress over the last 2 decades. It's about getting that top level interoperability that's easy for people to easily and immediately accessible, because time's moving, things change. So I see the gap, but at the same time, I also see the huge progress.
Thank you, Justin. I'm very happy. I'm very happy that you mentioned this community aspect, because what is really important that we continue talking about these things, and that Dick tells us what has been done and fights for the things that have been done and that are good, and that Pierluigi is still in the loop and says, yes, that is good, but we need something in addition here, and that we collect these things also from the different parts of the world. I think in Europe, we have very many activities going on now. We have managed to gather these people for a regular exchange, but digital twins of the ocean are global. So we also need to include the other community, the other regions, and so I don't think we disagree. We disagree in some senses, but it's good to disagree to agree in the end, and to build something that is good and sustainable.
Mm-hmm. No, well, okay. Let's say, I'm not saying that we are ready. I'm saying that we're making very good progress, and we are more than 90% already have progress, maybe. And we have working, but you know yourself that it's like an asymptote. Eh? The further you come, the more effort it takes. And this whole thing about fairness is also something that how we started fairness already in the 90s. Believe me, it's not something from the last 10 years. But over time, of course, let's say fairness becomes richer and richer. But before we really use the absolute maximum, that's infinity. That's how it works. But if you look at, if you were a scientist, let's say 20 years ago, and then you would want to have some data from the ocean, you really had a big problem. And nowadays you don't have a problem. You really can get it. Mm. But of course you have to do some efforts, because if you're a lazy scientist, you won't get it. So yeah. Yeah,
but if we're talking about digital twins, don't we have to move much more towards this machine to machine? Instead of the human in the loop, and you call it the lazy scientist, but
okay, but that's what we're working on. Everything is now machine to machine.
Yes, exactly.
Sparkle, all this kind of stuff, and linked data and so on. You name it. Yeah. But it's not so simple. It's not only technology. There's also a lot of quality. Always don't forget, we are interested in the content of the pipes and not in the pipes itself. And some of the technicians they forget this.
I think the beautiful piece of work around this that kind of demonstrates this situation is the fair implementation profiles that the European Science Cloud have produced. And when you look at those, you can see that there's different communities have achieved huge levels of interoperability in different ways. So the marine community has achieved it in one way around DRIs, ERDAP and Sparkle. You look at the terrestrial community, they've used, wrong community to choose, atmospheric community, they've used a lot of AVC standards to achieve their interoperability. And so effectively we have communities that have done incredible work to actually achieve interoperability, actually deliver the data to their communities. I think the challenge is it's around how do you then bring those distinct profiles together in order to give that top level of interoperability, that top level of discoverability, because you're never going to get full interoperability right down to the granules across communities unless you've got a specific use case. But you still need to have that kind of top level of discoverability, which gives you the pointer to that community standard, which means you can then go and access the services within that community in order to get that data. So it's taking what we've got, which is effectively, they're not disparate, but they've achieved interoperability in different ways. If you look at material scientists, it looks wholly different to marine side. If you look at biodiversity, there's a lot of linked open data standards there, which are very different to ERDAP standards on the marine side. And so it's how do you get that discoverability, and then how do you build those bridges where those bridges are needed?
Thank you, Justin. I think we need to take this to wrap up the session because time is unfortunately up. I will send a doodle for a total discussion very soon, so we can continue this. I would like to thank the speakers once more, and I would like to ask everybody who wants to, if you could turn on your camera so that we could take a picture like we did yesterday evening. Oh, Martin is here even to join us. Hello. Then we will take a picture. I have saved the chat. I'm not sure, Joanna, if you have done this as well. And again, I also want to thank Joanna in the top here for organizing this, organizing the speakers, help me with the session and so forth. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for participating. I have saved the chat. We will put everything in this folder that is dedicated. And now I'm taking a picture. So please smile. How do I do that? On screen? Okay, Nicholas was lagging. I do this once more. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks so much, everybody.
See you all.
See you, bye.